Is it time to trust Carson Palmer? Is it time to give up on Cam Newton? And which Jackson will be the best wide receiver for Week 8? Welcome to a fantasy edition of CBS Local Sports. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Dave Richard. And we're telling you about some starts and sits for this coming week. Dave, let's start at the quarterback position. You like or maybe love Carson Palmer against that Eagles defense.
It's bordering on love, smoldering love with Carson Palmer, and it has to do with the matchup against Philadelphia. They have been very accommodating to opposing quarterbacks this season.
Come on
I
in.
think Carson Palmer at home, he's going to invite the Eagles in. They're going to tell him, have some Gatorade, get yourself ready, and then he's going to throw all over on them. It's going to be multiple touchdowns. The receiving core is healthy there. Don't rule out a big game from Michael Floyd. I think Carson Palmer is a great start in Week 8. You tell me if it's the same thing's going to happen when the Seahawks wait for their invitation from Cam Newton.
Sure, Cam's going to invite them over. He's going to say, come on in. We know your defense has been struggling. I'm going to try and make things better for you. And maybe he will. I think you look at the way that, unfortunately, he's played. He's been so up and down. Sometimes he's had a good matchup, and he's failed to take advantage of it, like last week against Green Bay. Then he goes and plays the Bengals, which we thought was going to be a tough matchup for him, and he decides to run again. So it's hard to say which Cam Newton's going to show up. Will he get the second touchdown? Because we know he's starting to run a little bit more. He's had at least 40 yards rushing each of the last 2 weeks, and that's good. I just don't know how much you want to trust Cam Newton with his offensive line against what should be a very angry and upset Seattle defensive line. They got pushed around by St. Louis last week. I think they bounced back. If this was in Seattle, I would say absolutely no to Cam Newton, but he could be okay. I just think you don't have to trust him. Carson Palmer's a much better starting option.
Yep.
Ryan Tannehill, maybe even Kyle Orton and Alex Smith, better starting options than Cam Newton.
The thing that I like about Cam is that I think his floor is probably about 17 fantasy points, which isn't a bad thing. And his ceiling is pretty high, but I'm with you. I think there will be 12 quarterbacks that are better than Cam Newton. We both have our crushes in fantasy football. That's just the way things go. You have Shane Vereen. I've got Alfred Morris. If Shane Vereen is active on Sunday, what do you think of him?
I think he's a great start. You look at the way that he played last week in that game against the Jets, and I think that's a sign of things to come because his first game without Stephen Ridley led the Patriots running backs in snaps, led them in touches, worked at the goal line where he scored a receiving touchdown. We obviously saw the big play down the field. So he's going to live up to the expectations of being a breakout running back now that Ridley is out of the way. It's a very good matchup at home against the Bears. He should be able to do a variety of things. Great in PPR leagues, great in standard leagues. Again, as Dave said, as long as he's healthy, you start him this week, and you definitely start him over Alfred Morris, who unfortunately just not getting the job done.
I've loved Alfred Morris ever since he came into the NFL, and if I'm playing fantasy football with my heart, I'm starting Alfred Morris. But I play fantasy football with my brain, and I see a running back who's not getting the opportunities that I would normally expect to see Alfred Morris get. He's in an offense that's now being piloted by Colt McCoy, and he's going up against a Cowboys defense that's played beyond expectations this year. So even though Alfred Morris, good running back, you drafted him with a high pick, I had high expectations for him, I would try and run for the hills against him this week. Do not start Alfred Morris. There's Trey Mason. There's Bryce Brown. There's Anthony Dixon. There's Denard Robinson. All four of these guys. They started the week on waivers in pretty much every single league. Go out there, start one of them. They'll all be better for you than Alfred Morris this week.
All right, we have a battle of Jacksons at the wide receiver spot between Vincent Jackson and Deshaun Jackson. You like Vincent Jackson, as do I, better than Deshaun Jackson. But tell us why Vincent Jackson should be a good start this week.
Love the matchup against Minnesota. You can start there. You can also continue on that the Buccaneers are coming off the bye week. And Mike Glennon's been really great for this offense. When he's played, you've seen Vincent Jackson produce. And I think you're going to continue to see that against Minnesota. They might tilt the coverage towards Jackson. I think Mike Evans is a good sleeper this week. But I think Vincent Jackson can find the end zone, can get close to 100 yards in the game. That's really good for fantasy football. I'm looking for about 15 points from him. I would be devastated if he had 3 catches for 50 yards in this game.
I would too. Starting him in a few leagues, and I'm starting him over Deshaun Jackson, who I think you look at. You mentioned it, Dave, with Alfred Morris. It's the Colt McCoy factor. Dallas' defense has played very well, and I think they will continue to play well this week. But McCoy is going to hurt the entire passing game for the Redskins. I know he came on last week, had the touchdown to Pierre Garçon. I like Garçon better than Jackson this week. I think Jordan Reed actually benefits because of the matchup and because of McCoy probably trying to get the ball out of his hands pretty quickly in the middle of the field. But Deshaun Jackson's going to need to make plays down the field, as we've seen. And we know he's a boomer bust type receiver. Was a bust last week. I think he'll be a bust again. So I think Deshaun Jackson's a guy you can get away from. In a 3-receiver league, I'd probably still stick with him just because of the potential of a home run play. But in standard 2-receiver formats, flex position, I would stay away from Deshaun Jackson. I don't even know if he's a top 30 receiver this week.
I'm with you on that. Are you a fan of John Mellencamp?
Sure.
So it hurts so good at tight end, huh? You see what I did there?
Funny guy.
I know that you're a big fan of Zach Ertz this week and that you're starting him.
Yeah, it would hurt me to bench him this week because of the matchup against the Cardinals. I think you look at the way that he played last year against Arizona, 2 touchdowns. We'd obviously love that, but the last time we saw Zach Ertz on the field against the Giants, finally bounced back from a poor start, and I think it's going to something that he can build on coming into this game this week against Arizona. They haven't been as bad against tight ends as they were a year ago, but they have allowed at least three tight ends to get 80 or more receiving yards. We've seen them give up a 2-touchdown game to Julius Thomas, and again, last year, good history there. We know Nick Foles likes to use his tight ends. In that game against the Giants, Ertz scored a touchdown, and so did James Casey. Blanking there for a second.
It's okay. No one in Philadelphia remembers James Casey. At this point.
That's right. One of the poor signings that they made.
Really, yeah.
In any event, Zach Ertz should have a good game this week against Arizona, better than Delanie Walker.
Yeah, not a fan of Delanie Walker this week for the Titans, and he's going up against a Houston defense that's been really good against tight ends. A couple weeks ago, they played against Dwayne Allen, and we learned the hard way that matchup is legit. Dwayne Allen didn't have a good game. He was involved in the offense, just couldn't really do a lot with it when he had the opportunities. And we know that Zach Mettenberger is starting for the Titans at quarterback. I think he's an okay quarterback, but I think his specialty is throwing far down the field. I don't see Walker really engaging in those types of targets. I think he's a short to mid-range guy. I'd stay away from him if you could. If you don't have any other options, he's your only tight end. Don't feel bad about it. You can go ahead and keep him there. But if I could start somebody like Zach Ertz ahead of him, maybe even Clay Harbor with Jacksonville, I would go that way. I don't think Delanie Walker has a big week.
Yeah, I like Charles Clay better as well, and you can maybe even get a situation with a touchdown-only guy like a Gavin Escobar. All right, well, hopefully you have some success in Week 8, and hopefully we helped you set your lineup with a little bit more success. For Dave Richard, I'm Jamie Eisenberg. This has been your fantasy edition of CBS Local Sports.